Okay, we are back. Now that we've got the context and this sort of core claim of the book, Human Condition, out in the open, we can advance into some of the more detailed points that she makes. So, Arendt says throughout this reading we've done, but we can see it on page 9, that technology potentially changes the human condition. In fact, that's probably the way it changes most often, is that something is invented and human beings gain some sort of scientific or technological control that changes the background environment they live in, that spreads so widely and so deeply that it becomes not just a thing in our lives, but a part of what it means to be human. So, her point about technology is interesting, and it's something we should all think of today. She says that if you use something, it changes you. Okay, so you might literally pick up a tool, a technological tool. You might literally pick it up and then set it down. But metaphorically, it's like you continue to hold the thing. And it's almost like, this will sound too negative, but it's almost like the thing stays on you as a burden even after you've set it down. So our interactions with the built environment, the engineered world, leave traces or effects on us. So science would agree with her, actually. There's all sorts of studies that'll show that the environment around us, the colors, how tall the buildings are, whether there's pollution or not in the air, whether it gets completely dark at night or not, all sorts of things like that in the built environment. Trauma, tool use, computer use. Science agrees that all these things change the brain over time. And she's not against this, by the way. She's concerned that we don't reflect on how our technology and tool use change us, but she doesn't think technology is bad or anything. In fact, often it's very good. It all sort of depends on how you use it. So remember, in the beginning, she sounds pretty skeptical or mad or sad or something when she's talking about what other people say about going to the moon. But she's not against the technology that takes us to the moon. She just thought it was odd that among the many things said, that some people seemed to be excited that they could now leave the Earth behind and go live somewhere else. And remember, this is before talk of global climate change and global warming. So she was confused about, wait, since living on Earth defines us, why are these people so excited to get away from the Earth? But once more, she's not against that technology or technology in general. But this is something that you and I should reflect on today. My job as an online professor is almost entirely in front of the computer. My entertainment is almost entirely in front of the computer, because when I watch TV or movies now, I do it either literally on my computer. I did that last night. I watched TV on my computer. And even if it's not on my computer, with Hulu and all this stuff, I'll pull something up on my computer and then beam it into my TV. So I'm constantly interfacing with my computer for work. And what do I do when I'm done with work? Oh, let me relax from all this computer work and do some computer entertainment. And it's not just me. You're probably the same way. So I think a lot of us think is that we are who we are, and we interact and we use technology, and then we set it down and walk away. And what she wants to point out through her philosophical concept of the human condition is that things condition us. We don't just use them as their sort of master and then walk away. It's that if we use them enough, especially, they end up conditioning or shaping the meaning, significance, background, context of our lives. Okay. All that to say, the traces that Facebook and online discussion on Reddit and comment boards on YouTube and stuff like that are probably not leaving only good traces on us. They're probably shaping us in ways that become invisible, but that are not only good for us, partly bad for us. So, you might say, okay, technology can shape me for good or for bad, but I'm not an engineer. I'm not a computer scientist. It's not up to me. It's up to the people who make these things. But do you know this saying that politics is too important to leave it to the politicians? She says something similar on page 3. She says, science is too important to leave it to professional scientists because they're spending, as they should and must, so much of their time focused on the science aspect of it. What's possible and why? Can we replicate it? Can we explain it? That's the job of a scientist. And so they're focused on those things. Most scientists don't have the time, let alone the desire, to then also figure out, well, what would be the best use of this? Should we prevent something because it might be bad? Should we make sure we do something else because it might be good? It's just not their job. It's your job. Oh, it's also, she doesn't think it's lawmakers' job to be in charge of all this stuff. We as a society ought to say what we think is good and bad, what kinds of technology we want, and what kinds we don't want. What happens instead is that we don't tell the tech people what we want and what we don't want. So they do whatever they feel like doing. I mean, you didn't ask for a human ear to be grafted onto the back of a mouse, did you? I mean, I don't read your... maybe that is what you talk about on Reddit. By God, if someone doesn't put an ear on a mouse soon, I'll lose it, No, they just do what they can do, what they feel like trying out as an experiment, and what they can get financial backing for. Once more, I'm not criticizing scientists, technology people here, neither is she. It's that we have to realize that we have a different relationship to science and technology than we typically think. Since we don't, and we'll talk about this more later, we don't get together in public forums and talk in advance about what sort of technology we want, about what sort of uses of technology we hope to see and which ones we don't want anyone spending time making. Then we just leave the scientists to go try whatever they feel like doing. Remember not too long ago, there was a Chinese scientist who, I'm blanking on what he did now exactly. So I forgot the details, but I just Googled it up because technology is not all bad. There was a Chinese scientist a little ways back who edited the genes of babies. He did it in order to prevent them from acquiring AIDS from their parents who had HIV, if I remember right. But he edited what's called the germline, which means that they can pass those genetic changes on possibly to other people. And this was sort of, no one asked this guy to do this. It's not, the changes he made are not going to make an impact on global levels of HIV and AIDS, so it's not really useful. He just sort of did it presumably because he could, to see if he could. Right? Uber did the same thing. Uber goes into cities without checking what their laws are that regulate Uber, and they basically try to get the city to react to them and give them what they want before anybody asked them to come in, before they got any input from the community. Now, these are particularly sort of over-the-top examples, but what's happening now especially is all tech companies are doing this. And again, it doesn't mean that they're bad people, etc. It's that sort of the relationship that should be in place. We talk about what we want publicly. We talk about our values and our hopes for the future. And then science and technology respond to that because we as people, as consumers, are not publicly discussing often enough what we want, what our hopes and fears for the future are. That leaves a sort of vacuum of values or significance or meaning that technologists, scientists, and business people in general fill with whatever. It's not their fault that they fill the vacuum. It's our fault for leaving the vacuum empty. There's a vacuum, an empty space, a vacuum of values, and it's filled by whatever. Same thing, these scooters show up in cities now without people asking for them. Around where I live, these scooters showed up, and the way the law is that you have to ride them on the sidewalks because the law didn't apply to new technology. So the technology just fits in wherever, and then people ride them on the sidewalk and get injured and injure others. Right? Because no one came in advance and said what they wanted. Technology fills the gap with not what the technologists want, but just whatever happens to be possible at that moment. Okay? It's the same for things like Facebook. If someone made a gun, right? Let's say Glock makes a gun. You don't want them coming around and telling you how to use it, right? Okay? But most of us use technology, manufactured items, etc., just however the designers designed it. Now again, they made it not because they thought it was good for us, but just because they could make it or thought it might sell. So then we pick it up without telling them what we wanted, and we use it however they designed it. So we all gripe and complain when Facebook adds some new feature, right? Because it usually seems useless and annoying. But then what happens is we go about using that feature just the way it was designed. We complain a little bit, and then we do exactly what they wanted us to do. So you know this, they popped up a few years back probably now. These things where it would summarize your year of friendship with someone, or it'd show you pictures of what happened in the year. Nobody asked for that. And many people mocked it and said, I don't need you to show me what I should remember, etc. But then we all sort of ended up using it. Because once it's there as a technology, this is just like the moon point I made before. Once it's there as a technology, even if you haven't used it yet, it becomes part of your background context. It becomes part of what's possible for a human being. And then it's just a matter of time before you do it. And even if you don't, you know that you could, and you hear about and see other people doing it. So these changes end up shaping all of us, even if we don't use the new tech change. They end up becoming part of our total possibility and total history or story. Okay. So I want to broaden the point here. This isn't quite what Arendt is talking about, but it's relevant. Consumer culture is the same way, I would say. So if we're constantly buying things, little things, that don't matter very much to our lives, then we're cluttering up our lives and our mental space with all this stuff. Now, if things, as she says, condition the user, they become a condition or a fact about your life, then interacting with all these things will condition us or leave some sort of mark on us. So what happens for most of us in consumer culture is we're constantly buying new things. New clothes, streaming new music, buying new apps, trying out new food, etc. Now, by definition, if we don't care that much about this stuff, it's just new clothes, man, who cares? Then it's not leaving any good mark on us. It's leaving no mark. It's just sort of dead weight. It's just more clutter. On the other hand, though, if you do care a lot about these physical things, these consumer items, what you put in your hair, what you put on your body as your clothes, what you post to Instagram, etc. If you do care a lot about this stuff, then you're caring about cars, clothes, hair products, fashion, not really the heights of human activity, right? Okay. So I'm broadening out the point she makes about technology to consumer culture, to the stuff we buy and sell. It's not just that you buy these things and the real you wears them temporarily and then gets rid of them and that you remain unchanged. All this stuff we buy and sell shapes us and changes us over time. And so if you build your life around it, if it matters a lot to you, I'm saying your life isn't about things that are super important. Gym tan clothes kind of stuff, right? On the other hand, if it's not that important to you, but you're still buying and selling all this stuff all the time, then you're cluttering up your life and mental space and condition and environment with things that you admit you don't care that much about. So it's sort of either way, we don't have a really rosy picture here. If you're buying a lot of this stuff and it matters, you're devoting a lot of your life to something that's sort of unimportant. If you're buying a lot of this stuff but it doesn't matter much to you, then you're still spending all of your time on this stuff that's unimportant, but even you say you don't want to do it. We can keep the same attitude towards technology. Most of us don't think Facebook is that important or that valuable, and yet most of us spend plenty of time on Facebook. Most of us hate the commercials and the stuff they're trying to sell us on TV, and yet when the commercials come on, we watch them anyhow. Going back now, remember the four conditions that we pointed out before. Labor as natural animal needs. Work as human artifice, making something new for all humans to share. Action, speech, or politics as an individual doing something in public, saying or doing something that's new. It's like a brand new thing in the world that no one can predict. And then natality, or being born, as the sort of background fact about human life that we can read as a metaphor for lots of other things. That we're born without wanting it or asking for it, but something new and great might come out of it. Those are the sort of four conditions. And remember that I said that what she calls politics, action, or speech, as she defines it, is the most important one for her. This is why is that in politics, action, or speech, we talk to each other, not just to tell each other what we already think, but to figure out what we think and want and value together. Okay? In politics, action, or speech, we can come up with collective shared visions of what matters. We can figure out what we want to do in the future. We can remember our history and then figure out from that what future we want to promise to ourselves and to our children. That's what she means when she says politics. Politics for her isn't about voting. It's not about laws being passed. When she says politics, what she means is a bunch of people who live in the same city or state or nation coming together, publicly discussing what they're unsure about, and working together towards some idea, some shared vision for the future. She thinks we don't do that much anymore, and I agree. Therefore, when there's some new technology, it's never something that we politically asked for. It's not something that we, as a community, said we'd like to see our lives change in this specific way. It's just something that somebody who is very smart and had a lot of funding thought they might be able to make real. And that's not bad, that's not evil, but it's not really about us all together trying to work towards some ideal future together. It's about alienation and about separation rather than us coming together. And she also wants you to think about this in terms of your job. So the job that you're going to do once you're done with college, or a lot of you have jobs now, the jobs you do now, and especially important, the jobs you'll do after college, are those really things that help people come together? Is it really work that's going to leave a lasting impact on the world? That's going to help people figure out what they value, what matters most, what's significant to them? Probably not. There just aren't that many jobs like that. Now, this is what she says, though. She says, work has come to define us now. This is around pages 4 and 5. She says the jobs that most people do now define them. And if you talk to a lot of people, if you want to get to know something about them right away, you often ask, well, what's your job? What do you do for a living? And she'd be one of these people who go, jobs? Jobs aren't living, right? That's what you do in order to live. But they're just the necessary junk you have to get out of the way so you can eat, so you can raise your kids. So she says, for most of us, our jobs aren't about real human communication, what she calls politics, action, or speech. They don't contribute something lasting to the world like work would do. And yet, weirdly and sadly, we come to identify ourselves more and more with this job that means less and less to others and less to us as the worker every day. That's really sad. But what she says, this is what there's an ironic twist coming here. She says, but you know what would be even worse than the current state of affairs? Where you work 50 hours a week and never take vacation, don't like your job, and your job doesn't contribute to the rest of the world. That's the current state. You know, it'd be even worse if artificial intelligence and automation and technology mean that nobody has to work in the future. She raises that possibility. So think about it. If there's self-driving cars, nobody needs to be a trucker. And if there's self-guided hamburger flippers, which already exist, then nobody needs to flip hamburgers. And they do have technology. It's not very good, but it'll only get better with time. That can grade papers. That's my job. There's already technology. This is what advertising on the internet is built for, that instead of doing a bunch of interviews with people to learn how to market to them, you just crunch the numbers. If people who say these words online buy this product, then we just simply market that product to people who say those words. You don't need a Don Draper whiz-bang marketing genius anymore. So what if technology comes and makes it where most or all of our jobs are unnecessary? We define ourselves through our work nowadays. If our work is taken away from us by technology, even if we still get a paycheck, how are you going to fill your days? You'll have a lot more free time, but if you define yourself through your job, like a lot of people do, if that job goes away through automation, what the heck are you going to do with those extra 40 hours a week? I'm just saying that's just the question for you. That's just something you're going to have to consider. So, these are the kind of ideas, like I said, we're opening up some big questions here today. And it's not about Arendt telling you what you should do, what hobby you should develop if your job becomes automated and you don't have to work. It's that you want to think about these big human questions before you have to decide on them. You want to be able to think about these human questions in speech with me, with other students, and with Hannah Arendt. Because some of them will have ideas you haven't thought of before, and talking with them will help you refine your own ideas. This is part of why philosophy is important and the value of philosophy. You've wondered about some of these questions before in your life, but some you haven't. So philosophy can point out important questions to you that you haven't thought of. And it can point them out to you and ask you to think about them now when you've got some free time or when you've got a class devoted to it, which is good because you don't want to be asking yourself these questions for the first time once your job's already automated. You don't want to wait to ask yourself, what's the meaning of life and death at the funeral? So, one value of philosophy with these questions is asking you questions, some of which you haven't thought of before. Second layer or aspect of value is that philosophy can get you thinking about these things now while you've got time to think about them, instead of once you're already thrust into the moment. The third part of it is what I already said, is that while you have ideas of your own which are valuable, you can sharpen those ideas, make them make more sense to you by talking with other people, and you can also expose yourself to their ideas and answers to the questions that you might not have come up with on your own. So you enrich your own ideas by talking them out to other people, and you are enriched by other people's ideas by listening to them and selectively absorbing the ideas that you like and you want. Now, all of that is almost identical to what she describes as speech, politics, or action. It's about learning who you are, showing who you are to others, learning who they are and what they have to offer you. The question is, where does that happen best? Does it happen best on Facebook, Reddit, and Instagram, and YouTube comments? Does it happen best face-to-face? Does it happen best in reading a book where someone's talked about these things? Who knows? Again, I leave the question to you. I think it's a fact, Arendt and I will argue for it as a true fact, that it's important to think and talk about these kinds of issues. I leave it as a question to you what the best way is to do that. And of course, if you don't think the best way is Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, if you think a better way is face-to-face or through a book, then it's up to you to shift your time and priorities toward those better ways. It's not my job to tell you what's better. It's your job to figure out what's best for you and then actually do it. Shift towards those better things. So, Arendt says, this is strong language, but she says, to lack speech, action, politics. Again, that cluster of words that for her means speaking together in public, trying to figure out together what a shared vision of the future might be. Speech, action, politics. She says, to lack that is to be a barbarian or a slave, on page 27. Now, I know these are sort of the triggering words for people. Her point is not about American slavery, nor is she calling some other culture a barbarian. What she means is that in human history, those who could not speak, those who did not get a voice in deciding what was good in their society, those who were not part of the future, but just part of the present or past, they were literally considered to be barbarians. They were factually slaves. So if today we voluntarily give up speech, politic, actions, if we today voluntarily chat about nonsense things on Facebook, if we today voluntarily ignore politics because it's stressful, so that we can be entertained by something fun and frivolous instead, it's not that she's calling you a slave or a barbarian. It's that you are allowing yourself to act like people who are forced into that situation as slaves. It's like you being a dictator to yourself. If you give up talking and thinking about these things in public with other people for a job or for entertainment, you are reducing yourself to the level that some people are forced into. You are saying, I will just feed myself, I will just sleep, I will just do work. You're giving up on the highest part, she thinks, of the human condition. Trying to persuade and be persuaded. Trying to join coalitions with other people to make something new and amazing happen in the future. Trying to find a new place of values and significance for all of us. That's really sad. And that seems to be the way the modern world goes as a general rule. So, we will end this recording with a question, and this will be the end. Oh, it's nearly the end. We'll return to the question in one moment. I want to say one more point before I ask this question. This is a point we see on page 10, but it really animates this whole reading. Okay? Arendt talks about the question, who am I? Who am I? And she thinks this question has two sides. One is, what does it mean to be the kind of thing that can ask the question, who am I? Only human beings ask this question. So what does it mean to be a human being? That is, what does it mean to be able to ask the question, who am I? That's what we've been going over as the human condition. Who am I necessarily involves also asking the question, I am a particular human being, so what does it mean to be a human being in general? That's what we've been going over here. The other side of that is the more personal side. Well, who am I? What do I value? What am I scared of? And that's really a question only you can answer. But this is what she says. She says, this question, who am I, with its two sides, very personal and very general, human condition, is sort of the philosophical question, the philosophical question. You know what I mean? Now, this is what she says. She says, it's a question. You have to try to supply answers, but it will always remain a question. Not a question that has zero answers, but a question that has difficult answers that you're always a little unsure about. You're always asking again. That doesn't make it a pointless question, though, right? If you say, who am I, and you give answers, that's good. But you should also always know that that question or the answer is going to change tomorrow, right? Because you'll change tomorrow. You're an interesting, dynamic lady or man, right? You know, you're changing all the time. The world is changing all the time. So the answer to the question, who am I, needs to be given, but it also needs to be revised and changed tomorrow and asked again and again. Well, for her, that's what philosophy is. It's not just BS opinions. It's real answers to the most important questions. But those answers need to be revised and modified as the world and as yourself change. So it's the hardest question to answer. And it's only something a human being can do. Only a human being can ask herself, who am I? Okay. Now, part of the reason why we need to talk in public with others is ironically to discover who we are. So I'll repeat that because it's surprising. Arendt says if you really want to answer the question, who am I? You need to talk in public with other people. That sounds counterintuitive. And this is what she said in our reading. She said, to try to see yourself and define yourself, to answer, who am I, is like jumping over your own shadow. You can't get behind yourself and view yourself the same way you can view an object or another person. So once more, you have to answer the question, who am I? It's the most important human question. It's also the toughest. That's why it's philosophy. It's important, but it's tough. Specifically, why it's hard to answer the question, who am I, is that you can't see yourself objectively the way you can see other people objectively or an object objectively. That's what she means when she says it's like jumping over your own shadow. You can never get behind yourself to see yourself. The metaphor I like to use is that you literally cannot see your own eyeball. You cannot see your organ of sight. That is, you cannot understand how you understand. You cannot see the way you see the world. You can see the world and you can understand, but you cannot understand how you understand. You cannot see the way you see the world. Now you might say, yes, I can. I've got a camera phone or a mirror. I can see my eyeball, smarty pants professor. Well, my simple response is this. No. Through a mirror or a smartphone camera, you are getting a mediated or changed version of your eyeball. So the eye you see in the phone is not your literal eye, but pixelated version of it. The eyeball you see in the mirror is not pixelated, but it's literally reversed, correct? Remember when you hold up your left hand in front of a mirror, it looks like the other person across from you holding up their right hand. Everything's reversed. If you have words on your shirt in a mirror, it reverses them. So neither the mirror nor the camera phone give you pure access to yourself. In fact, they distort. They reverse the letters. They turn eyeballs into zeros and ones. So again, for Arendt, the most important question is, who am I? It's a tough question, a philosophical question. Ironically, if you want to know who you are, you need a metaphorical mirror of other people. You need a human who can talk to you about what they see or react to what you do and say, speech, action, politics. And then you can get a better, more whole idea of who you are. Better than a mirror, better than a camera on your smartphone, interacting with other people shows you who they are, but more importantly, it will show you who you are. Filtered through them, you get a more true vision of yourself than you'd get just daydreaming about yourself or filming yourself on your phone or staring in the mirror. So that most philosophical, most significant human question of who am I? You need other people to bounce yourself off of in action and speech. See how they react and what they say, and that will give you a better idea of who you are. Okay. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's one of the most interesting things that Arendt came up with, that idea. Okay. Backtracking just a bit to our question, which we will end this discussion on, or this recording with. Okay? Arendt says we need to talk in public with each other to understand ourselves and understand others. We need to talk with others in order to see what we want for the future, where we think we want to go. But today, I only have to say 2 words and you know just what I mean. Fake news. There's more misinformation than ever in the media. And when people talk online, they say what they mean less and less. They show a version of themselves online, and they show a different version depending on the app that they're using. You act very different in Snapchat, if you still use that, or your stories on Instagram than you do with your public posts on Facebook. So, facts about the world and about politics are distorted through the media. And social media, we distort who we are, and it distorts how we see other people. So the question is this. For speech, for living publicly together, what would the ideal form of speech look like for you? Okay? If we have to interact with other people because that's part of what it means to be human, we're social animals, what does that look like for you? Is it face-to-face? Is it online? Is it a mix of these? And also, who gets to speak? If it's everyone talking, whether online or in a physical place, it's chaos. It's too much. But if we have just a few select people speaking for us, well, that's just the 1% running the media, right? And when it's just a few people speaking for all of us, the variety of individuals seems to fall out, and we just get us versus them, left versus right, things like that. Okay? So it's a general question, but fake news, to avoid the problems with fake news and social media, what would ideal human conversation and discussion and interaction look like for you? Okay? You can do this as hypotheticals, very unrealistic things, or you can say, when this actually happens in the real world, that's when it goes best for me. So you can point to real stuff or hypotheticals. What's the best form of human interaction, conversation, discussion like for you? Once more, that's the discussion question itself. Okay. And some follow-on details you might add here. How do you consume political information, or do you? Okay. Where do you get your social political commentary? And do you know of any ways to get around fake news or misinformation? Okay, so when you consume political or social information, you know that there's fake news and misinformation and bias out there. How do you avoid it? Okay, maybe you just don't read those things at all. You just ignore it. But if you ignore it, tell me why. And if you don't ignore it, how do you try to deal with it or manage it? Okay. So that's the discussion question. We'll just leave it right there for now. And that's how we're going to end Arendt. If you have any questions about her, since we only read just the first few pages of the book, be sure to email me. As you can tell, I'm quite excited about her and like her a lot. I could talk about her as much or as little as you want. Okay? All right. Thank you, everyone. I've enjoyed this reading.